The mahogany table was so polished I could see the reflection of my parents' smiles as they handed the check to my sister. $11 million. The entire liquid estate of Silverleaf Vineyards. Olivia snatched the paper like it was a party favor, her manicured nails clicking against the wood. Then my mother turned to me. Her eyes were empty, devoid of anything resembling maternal warmth. "Go earn your own, Caitlin," she said, her voice flat and dismissive. "You chose dirt over dignity." My pulse didn't even spike. In my line of work, you learn to spot a dying vine long before the leaves turn brown. I just looked at the check, then at them, and felt the strangest sensation wash over me. It wasn't grief. It was freedom. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I stood up. The chair legs scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that cut through their celebration. "Understood," I said. It was the only word I spoke. I turned and walked out of the office past the receptionist, who wouldn't meet my eyes, and into the blinding California sun. The truck engine roared to life, kicking up a cloud of dust as I peeled out of the lot. I drove straight back to Silverleaf, but I didn't go to the main house. I drove past the manicured lawns and the tasting room where Olivia was probably already popping champagne. I headed for the fields. My boots crunched on the gravel near the old conservatory, the glass structure on the edge of the property that my parents called an eyesore. Inside, the air was thick and humid, smelling of damp earth and growth. This was my sanctuary. I walked to my workbench and picked up the grafting knife. It was old, the wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. Grandpa Henry had given it to me when I was 12. "This is the most important tool you'll ever own, Katie," he'd said. "It knows the difference between what needs to grow and what needs to go." Into the bag it went. Next came the journals, the ones filled with soil pH levels and grafting schedules. For 7 years, the frost alarms had woken me at 3 in the morning, dragging me out into the cold while the rest of the house slept. I was the one who hand-grafted 4,000 vines after the blight of 2018 nearly wiped us out. While Olivia was posting selfies with her wine, I was knee-deep in mud, saving the harvest she claimed credit for. Why did I stay? Why did I let them treat me like just the gardener for so long? Because I thought it was my duty. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I saved enough vines, if I made the wine perfect enough, they would finally see me. I thought my sacrifice was love. But standing there in the silence of the greenhouse, I realized the truth. It wasn't love. It was a transaction. I gave them everything, and they gave me nothing. And now the transaction was over. I took one last look at the rows of seedlings I had nurtured from nothing. "Good luck," I whispered. Then I walked out, locked the door, and didn't look back. 48 hours later, my phone lit up with a notification from the Silverleaf official account. It was a video of Olivia. She was standing in the middle of the North Block, the golden hour sun, catching the highlights in her hair, holding a glass of our reserve Cabernet. She was launching her new campaign, the Visionary Vintner. I watched in silence as she looked into the camera and lied without blinking. "When I developed this soil blend," she said, her voice husky and serious, "I knew I wanted to taste the earth in the glass." The video paused under my thumb. "When I developed this soil blend," the soil blend she was talking about was a specific ratio of volcanic ash and compost I had spent 3 years perfecting to balance the pH levels of our rocky terrain. Olivia couldn't tell the difference between nitrogen and neon, but the comments section didn't care. It was flooded with heart emojis and praise for her genius. She wasn't just taking the money. She was taking the work. She was harvesting a crop she had never watered. There were no angry comments from me. No rage posts. Instead, I put on my boots and drove to the main production facility. I wasn't going there to fight. I was going because fermentation tank 4 was in a critical phase, and if the temperature wasn't adjusted by 2 degrees, 5,000 gallons of vintage would turn to vinegar. It was a reflex. I was still protecting the wine, even if the people who owned it hated me. I walked up to the employee entrance and swiped my keycard. The light flashed red. "Access denied." I swiped again. Red. It wasn't a glitch. It was an eviction. I stood there listening to the hum of the cooling systems inside, knowing exactly what was happening to the grapes, and realized I was locked out of my own life. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my father. "We're moving in a new direction," it read. "We don't need a gardener anymore. We've hired a consultant to handle the manual labor. Clear out your locker by Friday." A gardener. That's what they reduced me to. A doctorate in viticulture, a decade of research, and to them, I was just hired help with dirt under my fingernails. I opened the company website on my phone. I went to the hour history page. My photo was gone. My bio was gone. The timeline had been rewritten to show Olivia working alongside my grandfather learning the craft at his knee. I looked at the locked door. I looked at the security camera blinking above it. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to pretend the wine made itself, or that it was conjured by Olivia's smile. I didn't bang on the door. I didn't beg for my job. I texted my father back 2 words, message received. I got back in my truck. If they wanted to be the visionaries, they could deal with the blind spots. I drove away, leaving Tank 4 to overheat in the dark. 72 hours after my keycard was deactivated, my phone rang. It was Mr. Thorne, the family attorney. "Caitlin," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "Can you come to my office, alone?" I drove back to the city, passing billboards featuring my sister's face, holding a bottle of wine she couldn't name. When I walked into the conference room, the mahogany table was empty, except for a single sealed envelope. It was thick-yellowed with age and bore my name in handwriting I would recognize anywhere. Blocky, slanted, confident. Grandpa Henry's. "Your grandfather left this for you," Mr. Thorne said. "He instructed me to give it to you only after you had left the company of your own volition." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a stack of legal documents and a letter. I read the letter first. "My dearest Katie, if you are reading this, you have finally walked away. I knew you would. I knew they would try to break you to use your talent to feed their vanity. I couldn't leave you the money, Katie. They would have stolen it or guilted you into giving it up. I had to leave you the source." I put the letter down and picked up the deed. It wasn't just for the old conservatory. It was for the land it sat on, a 4-acre parcel that had been legally subdivided from the main estate 20 years ago. But underneath the deed was something else. A patent document. United States Patent Office. Assignee Caitlin Henry Silver. Invention genetic graph sequence number 842. The silverleaf rootstock. I stared at the words, the world tilting on its axis. The silverleaf rootstock. It was the genetic graft Grandpa and I had developed together when I was 19. It was a drought-resistant, disease-immune root system that every single vine on the estate was grafted onto. Without it, the Cabernet grapes would wither in the valley heat. Without it, the soil pH would burn the roots. "He transferred the patent to your name 5 years ago," Mr. Thorne explained. "He knew you were the only one who understood the science. The family has been using it under a revocable license granted to him. That license expired upon his death." He paused, looking at me over his glasses. "The license now belongs to you. You own the root system of every vine on that property. They own the brand. You own the life support." I looked at the patent. I looked at the letter. Grandpa hadn't left me behind. He had gone ahead to plant a trap. He knew they would take the fruit, so he gave me the root. "They don't know?" I asked. "No," Mr. Thorne said. They were too busy counting the cash to read the appendix of the estate plan. I folded the document and placed it back in the envelope. The shaking in my hands stopped. I wasn't just the gardener anymore. I was the landlord. There were no angry phone calls to my parents, no gloating texts. Instead, I called an agricultural attorney named Sarah, who specialized in intellectual property and farm law. We spent the next week auditing the Silverleaf operations. Since I now owned the patent, I had the legal right to inspect how my intellectual property was being used. What we found in the filing cabinets wasn't just negligence. It was fraud. Sarah slid a stack of agricultural yield reports across her desk. "Look at the dates," she said. "Starting 3 years ago, right around the time your grandfather's health declined, the harvest yields jumped by 40%. I looked at the numbers. A 40% jump was impossible without compromising the vine health. "They overharvested," I whispered. "They stripped the vines." "It gets worse," Sarah said. "They reported these inflated yields to their investors to secure a new round of funding. They claimed it was due to advanced management techniques. But the soil analysis reports from the same period show a massive depletion in nitrogen levels. They were killing the soil to pump the numbers." I felt sick. I had spent 7 years balancing that ecosystem, treating the soil like a living organism. My parents had treated it like a strip mine. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the soil compliance report, a signature. "Caitlin Henry." "I didn't sign this," I said, my voice trembling. "I know," Sarah replied. "The handwriting is too loopy. It looks like your mother's." They had forged my signature. They had used my credentials as a botanist to validate their agricultural malpractice. They had framed me for the destruction of the very thing I loved. If the investors found out the vines were dying, they would sue me. The sadness I had been carrying, the grief for the family, I wished I had evaporated. In its place was something cold and hard, a diamond of resolve. They weren't just bad parents. They were corporate criminals who had stolen my name to cover their greed. "What do we do?" I asked. Sarah smiled, a sharp, shark-like expression. "We enforce your patent rights. We revoke the license. And we send them the bill for every single unauthorized grape they've grown on your rootstock since the day your grandfather died." I nodded. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about excision. I had to cut the rot out before it killed the whole garden. Chapter 6. The Harvest of Greed. 1 month later, the first signs appeared. The vibrant green canopy of the silverleaf vines began to yellow. The leaves curled at the edges, brittle and dry. The grapes, which should have been plumping with sugar, shriveled on the vine. The blight had returned, and this time there was no gardener to stop it. Olivia's brand launch was a catastrophe. The flagship Visionary Red tasted thin and acidic. Wine critics initially charmed by her social media presence turned savage. "Silverleaf has lost its soul," one review read. "It tastes like marketing, not wine." Investors started pulling out. The stock price plummeted. The $11 million empire was dissolving into vinegar. Then came the knock on my door. I was in the old conservatory, repotting a rare orchid when I saw my mother's car pull up. She didn't march to the door this time. She walked slowly, her shoulders hunched. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears, the practiced weaponized tears I had seen 1,000 times before. "Katie," she said, her voice trembling, "please, you have to come back. The vines are dying. We're going to lose everything." I wiped the soil from my hands and stood up. "I know," I said. "I read the reports. We were testing you," she stammered, trying to rewrite history in real time. "We wanted to see if you could make it on your own. But we need you. The family needs you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation. It wasn't love, it was panic. She didn't want her daughter back. She wanted her fixer. "I'm not coming back," I said, "and neither are the vines." I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the legal file Sarah had prepared. I handed it to her. It wasn't a hug, it was a cease and desist order. "This is a formal notice," I said, my voice steady. "You are currently using the silverleaf rootstock in violation of my patent rights. Since Grandpa died, your license to use my invention has expired. You have 30 days to cease all agricultural operations using my genetic graft or pay retroactive licensing fees for every single grape you've harvested in the last 3 years." My mother stared at the document, her face draining of color. "You can't do this," she whispered. "You're destroying your own legacy." "No," I said. "I'm harvesting it. You planted greed, Mother. I planted integrity. We're both just reaping what we sowed." I closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. 6 months later, the sign on the main gate was replaced. The ornate gold-leafed Silverleaf Vineyards sign was gone, sold along with the mansion and the fermentation tanks to pay off the defrauded investors. My parents moved into a condo in town, their reputation shattered, their fortune gone. Olivia's influencer career quietly imploded when the truth about her genius came out. I stood in front of the old conservatory watching the sun rise over my 4 acres. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and promise. I had launched my own label, the Henry Reserve. It was small batch focused entirely on science-driven sustainability and the integrity of the soil. We sold out our first release in 48 hours. I walked down the rows of healthy green vines, their leaves turning toward the light. I stopped at an old gnarled vine that had been the first one Grandpa and I ever grafted together. I took out his knife, the wooden handle warm in my palm, and made a small, precise cut to prune a wayward branch. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered. I didn't need the $11 million. I didn't need their approval or their apologies. I had the roots. I had the work. And for the first time in my life, I had peace. Sometimes you have to let the old garden die to grow something real. If you've ever had to prune toxic people to save your own roots, share this story.